The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Would you take investing tips from a TikTok star? How about a YouTuber? Plenty of people do. So tonight, we'll explore the world of social media financial advice and ask, is free advice worth what you paid for it? Then we'll learn what new research says about whether the pandemic also led to an infodemic online. And as part of Media Literacy Week, we'll get some advice on how to be a good digital citizen. It's Wednesday, October 26th, and that's tonight on The Agenda. If you know what an influencer is, you can likely guess what a Finfluencer is, such as the lingo for self-made social media personalities who, in the latter case, dispense all kinds of financial wisdom on platforms such as YouTube, TikTok, or even the old-fashioned ones such as Facebook. But not all advice is equal. So while it might be free advice, is it good advice? Joining us now on how to navigate these uncharted waters, we're joined in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan by Kaval Olson-LePage, certified financial planner and advisory team leader with Affinity Wealth Management. And here in our studio, Siobhan Llewellyn, financial content creator and co-founder of Hiver Academy, which provides free online classes on personal finance catered towards women. Kurt Rosentreter, portfolio manager with Manulife Securities and a certified independent financial advisor, and Jim Chong, financial content creator, coach, and co-founder of the Fat Fire Club, which offers online classes on gaining financial independence. And we're delighted to welcome all of you, both here to our studio in Midtown Toronto. And Kaval, nice to have you on the line from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. And why don't we start with you right away? What do you see, Kaval, as the benefits of financial content creators on social media?
Absolutely. I think one of the benefits that we're seeing is the increased engagement that we're seeing from our younger Canadians into having more of an interest into their own financial future. We know that it's not something that's taught readily in schools. So the fact that they're able to access this content to maybe encourage them to do the research on their own or seek professional advice has definitely been beneficial.
So is the idea you sort of got to go where they want you to be and they want you to be on social media these days? Something as simple as that?
Yeah, we do know that, our millennial and Gen Z audiences are definitely more drawn to the ease of information that's coming from TikTok, Facebook, Instagram. We like the videos. I'm an elder millennial myself. I would much prefer to watch a quick 5-minute video than stream through maybe a 5-page news article. So I think it's definitely something that leans towards their tendencies.
Kurt, we hear all sorts of stories about how financially illiterate so many people are in this province these days. Do you think this fills some of that gap?
Absolutely it does. I would say financial literacy is still at an all-time low in every age bracket. I teach courses across Canada. I see it all the time. So anything you can do to, I think, initiate some interest by the public to learn a bit about finance to make them more knowledgeable is healthy. It's just more about, is it the correct advice to be giving in the first place?
Well, we will get to that in a bit. Siobhan, I want you to tell us about the Hiver Academy, or as we say in Quebec, the Hiver Academy.
Yeah.
Go ahead. What are you doing there?
So at Hiver Academy, we developed this platform as a way to help empower women to feel like they're in the driver's seat of their own personal finance journey and to take control of their own finances, and most importantly, to feel confident doing it.
And what prompted you to do this?
I think based on our own experience of 2 women trying to navigate the world of money and being in a situation where we felt the guilt, the shame, the judgment around trying to take control of your own finances and having that be such a barrier to taking that next step and to actually taking action or asking questions or being curious about it. And so that was the main inspiration. It started with ourselves, and quickly we realized that we are definitely not the only ones that feel this way.
Maybe I'm missing something here, but what's the guilt and shame of your personal financial situation?
I think in terms of, especially as a student, I carried a lot of student debt. I wasn't able to pay that off in a short amount of time. And I think with parents that are more risk averse or friends that didn't have the same situations as myself, I felt like I was digging myself into a deeper hole than I had to, and I didn't quite understand why. And it was really because I didn't have the tools, the resources, or the support network to be able to do that. And in joining forces with my friends and making sort of a pact to help us learn and be curious about that, it really started to snowball into this business that we have today.
Gotcha. Jim, the Fat Fire Club. That does not sound like a financial literacy or a financial advisory group, but I guess, well, I guess it is. Why don't you tell us what it is?
Well, the FIRE group is called Financial Independence Retire Early. And I was sort of put in that bucket, even though that was not my intent. My intent was to relay my experiences investing over 30 years. I'm a Canadian that invests only in U.S. assets, U.S. real estate. And I started putting my information out there, and people said, oh, this is like FIRE. This is very similar. He's not working anymore because he was able to generate investment returns and cash flow. So they sort of put me in that bucket, and I ran with it.
And okay, and give me that acronym again, FIRE.
Financial Independence Retire Early is actually the acronym, but I call it Relax Early.
Relax early. Got it. Okay. And what sort of gap in financial literacy or in financial services do you think you're filling?
So my intent wasn't to fill that need. I was just trying to talk to how I was when I was 14 years old, and I knew nothing. And everyone was lying to me about what could be done or what could not be done about money. I got so frustrated, I just went off on my own and started reading dozens and dozens of books, and I did it myself, and I figured out what worked, what didn't work, what are the caveats, what are the risks. Then I got onto social media, and then it just took off. I did not expect it. I got onto social media 2 years ago, and then all of a sudden, I'm getting 5 million views a month.
Say that again.
I'm getting 5 million views a month.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Okay, good for you. All right, now Siobhan, back to you for a second here. I get that a guy who works for a company that's called Manulife is allowed to give financial advice.
Yes.
Okay, we've all heard of Manulife. Are you legally allowed to provide financial advice?
Great question. We do not provide financial advice. I think we provide financial inspiration. And
What's the difference?
I think the difference is that when it comes to professionals, they are the experts, they have the education, and they have the knowledge to be able to direct the decisions that you make. Where we are trying to fill a gap is to help you feel like you have the foundational concepts to even take that next step to go to a professional advisor. And I think there is quite a large gap in terms of people not feeling or not believing that they are worth having an advisor for or having a financial planner because they are so overwhelmed with their own situation. And so we're trying to inspire people to get that confidence back and make them feel like they have a seat at the table and understand the opportunities available to them so that they can dictate their own financial journeys.
Okay, this is another one of these older people questions. How do you make money at what you do?
Another great question. So we are really fortunate to be able to partner with different organizations or financial institutions to be able to help them develop content around the products or services that they have and create our own review and experience of the product, and to be able to relay that in a way that is accessible, approachable, and understandable to our audience so that they can not only understand what these services and products are, but understand how they can benefit from them and apply it to their own life as well.
Okay, Jim, I'm going to follow up with you on that because this is another thing I need to understand here. Again, I get how a guy from Manulife makes money. How do people who put financial, if you don't want to call it advice, let's call it inspiration, whatever, how do you, okay, you get 5 million views a month? How do you make money from that?
So the intent at the beginning was not to make money, but I knew that with 5 million views a month, you could monetize it. And this is a totally different topic from financial literacy. Right? When you have attention, this is how you generally monetize it. It goes into a landing page where you offer something of value. So maybe 10 steps to sort of reduce your expenses, something like that. People want that download. You get that download, you have their contact information, and then you start asking them, what do you want to learn about? You basically sell them what they want to know. I want to learn how to invest in U.S. real estate. What did you do? What bank did you use? What mortgage did you get? What states did you look at? Why did you look there? How did you find the crime statistics? And then we build what they want, and then they purchase it.
All right, now we're going to get to the other side of this, which is, Jim, in your view, is there anything, nefarious is too strong a word, but anything concerning about the business model that they've just described here, given that there are, there are potentially built-in conflicts of interest here?
I think that, Steve, the difference between influencers pushing perfume or clothing, it's not quite the same as financial services where people can really get hurt. I think if I'm a Finfluencer, what I would be concerned about is credibility and liability. Credibility is things like designations, experience. Do you have professional liability insurance if someone sues you? Who's supervising the advice you give? What's the fine print that needs to be on the website? That's all about being a better professional and transparency of fees disclosed up front. October 3rd, Kim Kardashian just got fined $1.2 million for non-disclosing the fact she was paid by a crypto company to basically send out a message about them. That could have been taken, dealt with up front had she disclosed that. So I think the credibility side of it is if you want to be a professional in the eyes of how the government will view you and how they view the regulated channel, there's things that are pretty clearly you can do now. Go out and get your certified financial planner designation if you don't already have it, if you want to give any kind of financial advice. I think on the liability side, similarly, I would be so darn worried if I was doing this without the systems I have around me of supervision, of pre-approvals, of checkups and insurance, that if someone sued me because I told them to do the wrong thing on financial advice, they're going to take my house. And I think that's just good for the Finfluencers to protect themselves, but I think it'll also help the credibility of the whole industry. And it is playing a darn good role. Like my daughters who came through high school in the last 5 years got a few hours of financial education, that's it. They don't want to deal with dad. They want to be independent. They're also a little concerned and scared about it, right? Because it's intimidating stuff to sit with a guy in a suit who's old and talk personal finance. So it's absolutely serving a need to increase the education in the marketplace on basic personal financial topics. All ages should really adopt that, but let's be careful what we offer.
Okay, let's hear from Kaval on this. What do you say?
I would definitely have to agree with Kurt, where the concern lies on is how specific is that financial advice going to be, and are our Finfluencers adequately, discussing the risks that are associated, especially if you're looking at specific investment advice. I've researched some of these Finfluencers, and you can see anything from a general range of, advice giving. What is a registered retirement savings plan? What is a tax-free savings plan? How do you find your contribution limits? That's fantastic advice. That's stuff that people may not be aware of, and directing them to the appropriate websites to find that is fantastic. Where the concern is, and I'm sure Kurt can echo this, is when you start seeing very specific discussions around certain investments, whether it's cryptocurrency, whether it's specific stocks, ETFs, that side of things. And there's no discussion on the risk of investing in those. And there's no direction to go seek professional advice, because just because it's working for that Finfluencer doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work for, that Canadian who's watching that video at that time. And so that's, what really worries me is we're talking about people's finance. And if they make the wrong investment decision based on a general piece of advice that's out there on TikTok or Facebook, it could be very devastating to them.
Okay, you just mentioned an acronym, and this is an acronym-free zone, so we're going to say ETFs, exchange-traded funds, just so everybody knows what that is. Okay, Siobhan, let me get you back in here. You've heard some of the concerns. What do you have to say?
I think everything that they've said is completely fair, and I think it's something that both my co-founder and I take very seriously. And I think when you decide to have a business online, you take a sense of responsibility for what content you are putting out, and I expect to also be given that same responsibility from other types of legislation or institutions. So, for example, if I'm putting out content that goes just over the line of that financial advice, I expect that to be taken down, or at least, being flagged. And what Kaval was saying in terms of that foundational level up until they start to have that advice conversation is really where Hyber Academy fits in perfectly. So we are getting people that foundational financial literacy, that inspiration, that information. And then when they're ready to take that next step, when they, graduated from that foundational basis, then they move on to the discussions with financial planners and financial advisors and people that have that expertise, that credibility, to be able to direct their futures, because we're just trying to have people get that confidence first.
Jim, what do you say to these concerns?
100% agree. So all my social media platforms say it's education, not advice. You need to consult a financial advisor. No matter what idea you get from social media, I don't care what it is, stocks, bonds, crypto, real estate, you need to consult with your financial advisor and not take action on advice that you're hearing from social media. So 100%, you should treat it as education, not advice.
We have some info as it regards to that. And to that end, Sheldon, I'm going to ask you if you would to bring this up. This is the bottom of page 3. Australia penalizes unlicensed financial services. Earlier this year, the Australian government introduced new laws cracking down on creators offering financial advice without a federally issued license. Influencers can now be imprisoned for committing offenses such as profiting from affiliate links that direct followers to online brokers, providing opinions that a positive return is a guaranteed on a class of products, for example, those ETFs we talked about, exchange-traded funds, sharing with their followers long-term stocks and suggesting they buy and hold them, etc. Okay, this, I guess, raises a question. Why don't we hear, Kurt, from you first on this? Should we do this here?
So the regulation is coming on the whole online education, Finfluencer marketplace. Australia's led the way for a couple of years now, included in the regulation of their licensed financial advisor marketplace. UK, USA, Canada is a bit slower on this. And I think part of what's also good to appreciate is even in the regulated licensed world I'm operating in, mortgages are licensed and regulated different than insurance, which is licensed and regulated different than investment products. Within investment products, there's different licenses, different regulations, different requirements. And in the middle is general financial advice that's largely unregulated. So if you want to talk about goals and cash flow and saving for retirement, really, even in the regulated world, not a lot of people supervising or watching over that. So it's even more complicated because it depends on, in Canada, what type of advice you're giving. They're all in different pages. The provinces are even different to some degree. But regulation's coming because even in the license channel, something just came out a few months ago where they're now looking at titles of financial advisors in Ontario. So what I put on my business card, next up's going to be credentials. What do all those credentials mean? I've got 8 credentials. And if one of them was fake on my business card, you'd never know. They're not, but I'm just saying, you'd never know. So there's a lot of work to do, both in the regulated channel, and this is just added in, it's coming too. So if you want to get ahead of it, because they can literally shut you down if you don't kind of follow these rules over time.
Cavell, let's hear from you on this. Is this coming to Canada, and should it?
I think it's definitely on its way. Like Kurt mentioned, Australia is a leader in that they've regulated titles for who can call themselves a financial planner or financial advisor for a few years now, and Canada's in the process of doing that, which is fantastic. Definitely agree. And I do believe that there needs to be some regulation, at least in terms of, like we said, what kind of disclaimers are you putting on your online video to indicate, I'm being paid by such and such company to recommend this product to you, or again, making this investment recommendation because it worked for me, but it's not actually advice. Please go do your own research and talk to your financial advisor. So I definitely think it's on its way, and I think it's a good thing.
Jim, what say you?
I totally agree. So I think if you're giving advice on social media that seems questionable, like it's not education, it's not inspiration, it kind of borders, like you're talking about a stock, you're talking about a ETF, you should make a disclaimer very clear to say that this is not advice. You should consult your financial advisor, or some kind of disclaimer like that for sure. I put that everywhere on my social media channels, and it's important. But the fact is, 99% of people on TikTok, on the new platforms, they don't worry about that stuff, and that's a big problem. So one of the benefits of social media is that you get a lot of access to information, but 99% of that information, I would say, is harmful.
Do you, Siobhan, you want the government regulating what you put up on your website?
I think it should be regulated if it's in the best interest of the people, because I think within each of our different businesses, people are at the heart of it, and we're trying to help them. And so if institutions and companies like TikTok and Instagram can also take responsibility for ensuring that we are doing the best we can and legally, then I think that's a great step to helping us all make sure that we have a level of discernment when it comes to consuming social media.
Okay, let's do, Jim, I want to talk to you about Logan Paul. I got to confess, I didn't know who Logan Paul was before doing this. The so-called mega influencer, Logan Paul. You guys all know who he is?
Yes.
Sort of.
You all know who he is. Okay. All right. Anyway, he promoted some obscure cryptocurrency called Dink Doink. You ever heard of this?
Yeah.
Yeah? Am I like totally out of it here? Yeah, a little bit. Okay, Dink Doink I hadn't heard of before doing the research for this. He's got 6 million followers and he's promoting it to them, but he didn't disclose, apropos of what you said about Kardashian, didn't disclose an important conflict of interest. He was friends with the creator of the crypto coin, and they'd come up with this idea together, and then the price of Dink Doink plummets, and he finds himself in hot water. So the question, okay, Jim, come on in this. How common is bad cryptocurrency advice in the Finfluencer world?
I think it's rampant. Like last year when I was on TikTok, almost everything in my feed was on promoting a coin or promoting an NFT or promoting something related to
NFT,
cryptocurrency.
That's another one. Hang on, I think I might know this one. Non-fungible token? Okay.
Correct. So that was everywhere. And it was really bad advice. It was very damaging. But the voice and the interest and the hype around it was so big, it was almost inevitable that no one, including regulators, could keep up with it. And a lot of people got hurt. And it's a danger. That's exactly why it's dangerous to listen to social media when it comes to different asset classes and treating it like advice.
Having said that, Kurt, would you acknowledge there is some subjectivity to advice given, even by more established players like you at Manulife, for example? You do have to be aware of the fact that the advice you're giving is your opinion.
Absolutely. There's a framework of questioning and profile building. There's a range of securities you can offer that aren't suitable for everybody. You got to factor in fees and fee transparencies, fee levels, tax sensitivity, risk tolerance, the purpose of the account, goals, and all that. So for sure, this is not a science. It's an art to some degree within a framework that regulators have defined to make sure we keep people out of the ditch and manage the liability and make sure they reach their goals.
Cavell, how about you on that? Any concerns about this? I mean, this is a subjective business based on facts, but it's a subjective business at the end of the day, isn't it?
Absolutely. And just like Kurt said, our regulators have, very specific risk questionnaires that we have to ask our investors to determine suitability. And it's not just how much risk are they willing to take. It has to do with taking a look at their net worth. How much cash flow do they have? How much liquidity? If they were in an emergency situation, is this the only investment that they have, and would they need to draw on it? And, being very clear with our investors on the true volatility and nature of that investment is key. And sometimes we will tell them that we're not comfortable selling that investment to them. And I have actually refused because it is also my business on the line. And I don't want to make a recommendation that I believe is unsuitable based on their circumstances. And that would lead them then to, possibly go to a discount online brokerage and purchase it themselves. Okay. But ultimately, we do a very in-depth look into our clients and what's suitable for them before we make that recommendation.
Now, Siobhan, I'm told that some platforms are trying to be more aware when there is either malicious or quite obviously unhelpful content on their financial advice sites, and they're trying to take it down. Mm-hmm. And I gather TikTok, they're actually using artificial intelligence to help them discern what's appropriate and what's not, what's unsafe, etc. Any of your videos, have you had any of them pulled down by any platforms?
Luckily, we have a 100% live rate. We haven't had any videos taken down. We have other people in our network that have gone through that. And I think because of the nature of what we do and focusing on the foundational basic principles of financial literacy, we have a safer space that we can create content in. But I definitely recognize the risks like both Kurt and Cavell are talking about in terms of that discussion and those blurred lines, and that content should be flagged. And if you feel as an influencer that it still deserves to be public, then we can dispute that and recommend that they review it. So it gives us an opportunity to go back, but I think it saves the people first. So.
Can you give us some hints on what to look for on the difference between what would be sort of reputable, trustworthy information on your site versus, not on yours, but on, say, other sites that are, clearly over the line?
Yeah, I like to think of it as aspirational versus inspirational influencers. If you're following people that you feel that pressure and that urge to be like them or to have what they have, then I encourage you to take a step back and sort of filter through your social media and make sure that you're following people that inspire to be the best version of yourself and make you feel like there is no pressure, there is no urgency, because there's nothing quick about building wealth, as perhaps everyone can agree to. And so I think if there is that pressure, that urgency, take a step back and find someone that makes you feel like you have the time, the energy, and the confidence to look into it at your own pace.
So, Kaval, if I'm on a website and I see somebody dripping in jewelry with fancy cars and so on, maybe I should just maybe take a pause on listening carefully to that stuff?
I mean, with any online advice, right? I think Jim, Siobhan, Kurt, we've all said the same thing. It's about doing your own due diligence and research after. Red flags to look out for. Are they recommending specific products? Have they disclosed whether or not they're receiving financial gain from that? I mean, the Kim Kardashian, Paul Logan examples are prime examples of that. And so it's not necessarily, because they've got a diamond ring, you don't want to listen to them, but using that as your first stepping stone to then look at some additional advice, and take that information that you receive, take it to your planner or your advisor, discuss what you've seen, and talk about extending that education. See what they can teach you about giving whether or not that's a suitable product for you or a suitable even investment recommendation or savings plan.
We've got just a few minutes left here, and let's do, Sheldon, how about top of page 2 here? Let's do one more graphic. Who's watching this stuff? Who consumes financial content online? You will not be surprised to hear 33% of Canadian Gen, either Zers or Zers, depending on how you want to pronounce it, and 22% of millennials refer to financial influencers and social media for their investment decisions. In comparison, just 7% of Canadians over the age of 55 rely on these sources. That, according to a survey by Polera Strategic Insights. It was done for the Bank of Montreal, results released in April of this year. Okay, Kurt, there's no surprise in those numbers, is there?
No, because you're coming out of high school with no financial education. You're intimidated, you're concerned, you're stepping into jobs, you've got no idea what to do. And between about 25 and 35 years old, some of your life's biggest events happen. You're going to get a job you hope you have 40 years. You're going to sign up for a mortgage, the biggest debt of your life. You may get married, have children, and there's no one to turn to for financial advice. You want to start to push away from your parents. Maybe they're not the most financially literate either. And so, general education, the comfort and convenience of social media is there to kind of fill the void. The challenge, though, and the difference, I think, between a 30-year-old and a 55-year-old is experience, is that they've now, learned, they've been burnt a few times over 25 years. They do look for the fine print, they look for the credibility, the designation, they know when to turn to experts when they need it. So I think that it's just a learning experience, and as long as we can guide the young folks to make sure they know the difference between real and fake, they'll be fine too.
Jim, do you know the demographics of the people who are on your site?
Yeah, it's very interesting. TikTok actually does give analytics, and it seems like even though TikTok itself skews younger to 10, 12-year-old, the people that are following me seem to be 25 to 55. It's a big range. A large part of them come from America, and with the 5 million views, they skew about 45% women, 55% men. So it's a very interesting demographic. It's not as young as you would think from the platform.
Siobhan, how about you? Do you know?
Yeah, we started at about 100% female rate, and we netted out.
Which makes sense, because that's who you were aiming at
Yeah,
anyway.
that's where we aimed at. And then we realized a few months in that we ended up at a 70-30. So 70% female, 30% male.
If you are targeting women, why do you think 30% of your viewership is men?
I think because, like Kurt has said, financial literacy is beyond those analytics that TikTok gives us. Everybody needs it, and so we've tried to develop the language that you use to be more accessible and approachable for everybody.
Kaval, in your experience, do you think the Gen Zs, Gen Zs, the millennials, I think you mentioned earlier that you thought you were an elder millennial. I'm not sure there's anything elder about you, but anyway, do you think they are more money anxious or financial services anxious than previous generations?
We've definitely seen that, yes, about 45% of millennials and Gen Z, according to the FP Canada, Financial Planners Canada's Financial Stress Index, indicate that money is a stressor that is leading to negative mental health. What we are finding is, in that data where you indicated, about 33% of Gen Zs getting it from TikTok, Facebook, we are also seeing that about 47% are still going to a trusted advisor. So I think which is more significant than some of our older generations. So I think that the Finfluencers are doing a good job of creating that, filling that void to get them to that next step to talk to a financial advisor. And what we've seen from the Financial Stress Index is that more than half of people who use a financial advisor or have a financial plan feel less financial stress. So it's relieving that anxiety because they have a plan, they can see their progress. In times like right now where we're experiencing high inflation and, significant market volatility, being able to look at your plan and seeing that you're still making progress helps lift that weight off of your shoulder. And I think that's a definite benefit to working with a planner.
Last word goes to Saskatoon, Saskatchewan today. Kaval Olson-LePage, we thank you for joining us on the line from out west. Kurt Rosentreter is here from Manulife Securities, and our friends on the other side of the table, Siobhan Llewellyn and Jim Chong from Hiver Academy and Fat Fire Club, respectively. It's great to have all of you on TVO tonight. Many thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
During the worst of the pandemic, did misinformation spread as far and wide online as many feared? You might be surprised by what those crunching the data have discovered. And we're joined now by someone working on just that. From Oxford, England, Sasha Altay, postdoctoral research fellow at Oxford University's Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism. And Sasha, it's good to have you on our program. How are you doing?
Very good. Thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you here. Let's just start with this. How do you and your peers define untrustworthy content?
Yeah, so it's a very tricky question. And to do that, we relied on a company called NewsGuard. They employ a team of journalists and editors to rate news outlets on 9 journalistic standards of credibility and transparency, such as whether they use deceptive headlines, whether they publish false content, and whether they correct errors. And to give you an example, the New York Times and the BBC are considered very trustworthy, for instance.
Mm-hmm. Now, did you find some countries had a bigger problem with this than others, and if so, which ones?
Yes. So first, to give you a scale of the project very quickly, we tracked web traffic, so the visit to news outlets, and Facebook engagement with 4,000 news outlets in 4 countries between 2017 and 2021. And what we find is that untrustworthy news outlets, so news outlets with weak standards of journalism or weaker standards of journalism, are way more popular in the US and France than in Germany and the UK.
And why would the US and France be worse than the other 2 countries?
It's a very difficult question, because one hypothesis would be that strong public broadcast service, such as it's the case in France or the UK, could be a shield against weak journalism, if you may wish. But because we see high levels in France, it's not very clear. We know that political polarization in the US is bad. We know that France, we have some societal problems. We had a lot of strikes, and so it's a difficult question.
Understood. Everybody wants to know about Facebook. How problematic did you find Facebook during the course of your investigation?
Yeah. So to give you some numbers, untrustworthy news outlets, they captured 2% of web traffic, but 14% of Facebook engagement with news outlets, Facebook pages. So it's much bigger. But again, we see big differences between countries. In France, news outlets, untrustworthy one, they accounted for 25% of Facebook engagement, but in the UK, it was only 2%. But we need to be careful about how to interpret engagement metrics on Facebook. people can engage with news on Facebook for a variety of reasons, and it does not mean that they agree or believe it. People do a variety of things on Facebook.
Well, that was going to be my next question, which is, do you get the sense that people are troubled by the fact that maybe a disproportionate amount of what they're reading on Facebook is actually not empirically provably true?
Yes, there is a lot of work showing that people are very skeptical of the news they encounter on social media, and people are very skeptical of news they find on Facebook.
Okay,
so people are worried about that.
But I guess the question is, are they more worried about news that's clearly fake from a phony website, or are they equally as worried about news that they would read in the Washington Post, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, etc.?
Hopefully, people are still more skeptical of news from untrustworthy news outlets. So people can distinguish between basically trustworthy news outlets they know and they trust, and news outlets they don't know and don't trust. And many studies have shown that people don't really trust hyper-partisan or fake news websites.
And do you find that encouraging?
Yes, I think it's very encouraging. But there is also a general tendency that in many countries, people don't trust the news very much, regardless of whether it's true or not. People are today very skeptical of the news. It's at least one of the big findings in the recent years at the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism, where I work.
Okay, Sasha, it is sort of conventional wisdom that there was a lot of misinformation and disinformation on numerous websites throughout the course of the last 2.5 years related to COVID-19. And I guess some people were calling it an infodemic to go along with the epidemic. And I want to find out from you whether you think our fears about the infodemic were accurate or overblown.
I think they were clearly overblown. And I think the infodemic metaphor misses the big picture. Sure, there was misinformation, and there was more misinformation during the pandemic, but there was also much more reliable information. And when we look at what people actually consumed during the pandemic, we see that people largely ignored news outlets with weak standards of credibility, and they instead turned to news outlets with the strongest standards of credibility.
And do you take any encouragement from that?
Yeah, I think it's very encouraging. And I think often we underestimate how reasonable and how smart people are. In psychology, we have this thing that's called the third-person effect. It's the idea that we think that others are more gullible than we are. They are more influenced by ads. They are more influenced by campaigns. And basically that people are a bit stupid, but that's not the case. On average, people are moderate. People are quite smart. And when they need to learn about something new, they go to good news outlets, not to bad ones.
In which case, where do we get the impression, because I think it is a very strongly held impression, where do we get the impression that people were just swimming in bad information, believing bad information, drowning in bad information?
I think our attention to the problem of misinformation has increased, but we should not forget that, Trump, who made popular the term fake news in 2016, he used it to discredit the news media and make people more skeptical of reliable information. The problem is that if people don't trust the news or don't follow the news, then Trump can do whatever he wants and people won't hold him accountable for his mistakes. So I worry that, by saying that misinformation is everywhere, and I think that's something the media, to some extent, have pushed, we risk making people more skeptical of everything, including the news coming from the media.
So is the big takeaway from this, then, that we should remember that large numbers of people still want reliable information from good sources, and they will follow it when they feel they've read it. Is that right?
Yes, exactly. And I think it's especially more the case when they need to make important decisions, such as decision to vaccinate, or when their decisions will have a clear impact on their lives.
Okay, what does your research reveal about the desire of people to get outside their echo chambers? Because again, this is one of the things we hear, that people only want to stay in their echo chambers, they only want to hear things they agree with, and they don't want to hear conflicting views. What did you find on that?
First, I must say that most experts in the field would agree that fears over echo chambers and filter bubbles are overblown. offline, we are more likely to befriend with people who share our values and political opinions. And the same happens on social media and online. The thing is that instead of increasing exposure to like-minded content, social media may actually increase exposure to content we disagree with, which can be quite unpleasant sometimes, But if anything, there is a large study in 17 countries that suggests that during the pandemic, people actually consume more ideologically diverse content rather than more like-minded content. So again, I don't think we should worry too much about that, because there are many studies that are not covered a lot maybe in the media, but that show that people have quite moderate and quite diverse news diet. And so I don't think, these fears are, I think, largely overblown.
Your research exactly seems to suggest that a lot of the deep fears that many people have had about how terrible things have been is not actually the case. And I wonder if you get a lot of pushback from people who say, I don't care what your research says. My sense of it is that it's all terrible out there.
Yes, but this thing about it being all terrible, people say that on social media, we are in filter bubbles, we are in our own echo chambers, but at the same time, it's all terrible. And it cannot be, these two narratives cannot be true at the same time. Social media and the internet cannot be a terrible place where we find offensive content, and at the same time, people are in echo chambers. It cannot be. So there are also, I think, a lot of inconsistencies in the alarmist narratives that we hear, is that they are not even consistent between each other. And I have some pushback, but I think experts are converging toward a clear consensus that, echo chambers are overblown. And even people who 5 or 10 years ago were convinced are now convinced that it's not a big problem.
Well, my gut has always told me that you're right, but I just hear so much conflicting evidence that I have not trusted my gut. But I'm glad to hear what you have to say about this.
Yeah. I hope that the truth will come out. I don't want to sound conspiratorial, but it's true that alarmist narratives are very popular for, it's very attractive to our mind also we think that things are terrible, that poverty is increasing. We have a lot of misconceptions about the state of the world.
Absolutely.
And we have this negativity bias that I think is very strong. Even in the news, there is a strong negativity bias. And,
Tell me this. I know Canada was not one of the countries that you studied, but I wonder if there are any lessons. We're on a Canadian channel, obviously. Are there any lessons for Canadians here that you think would be useful?
Yeah. So I must say I'm not at all an expert of the Canadian media ecosystem, but my guess would be that it cannot be worse than the US. So I'd say it's very likely that Canadians also turned to more reliable news outlets during the pandemic. But I'd be less confident, to extrapolating our findings to Asia, Africa, or South America. But I think to Canada, it's fine. I'm pretty sure that it's also the case. But there are very few, actually, studies on that. So it could be otherwise.
Well, I mean, first of all, I think most people watching this program would agree with you that we're not as badly off as the United States when it comes to political toxicity and so on.
Yes.
We're more than we want to be, but not as bad as the United States. But the fact that sort of 90% of the people in the province in which we're broadcasting right now went out and got vaccinated suggests that they heard the experts and agreed with the experts and followed suit. So that's encouraging, I guess?
Yeah, and overall, when you look at what people did during the pandemic, they did the right thing, even if sometimes elites and the government were, communicating in maybe confusing ways, and sometimes they were contradicting themselves, etc. So even if elite communication was not always perfect, I think the people were quite reasonable during the pandemic.
Sasha, you have given us one nugget of something to be somewhat enthusiastic about, which I'm delighted to hear. And we're very grateful that you could spare some time for us on TVO tonight. Thank you.
You're welcome. It was my pleasure.
Today is the very first Digital Citizen Day. It is the brainchild of Media Smarts. That's a Canadian nonprofit focused on digital and media literacy. And it's an opportunity to talk about something that we perhaps don't stop and think about enough: how to be good digital citizens. So, from the nation's capital, we're joined by Cara Brisson-Boivin. She is Director of Research for Media Smarts, and she's here with some tips on how to improve the online public square. Cara, it's good to meet you. How are you managing these days?
Oh, it's good to meet you. Thanks so much for having me.
Not at all. A pleasure. Why don't we just start with this? Is this a big deal, Digital Citizen Day?
It is. As you said, it's our first annual. And for us, it's a moment to pause and reflect and allow all of us to think about what it means to, live and engage and interact online. So much of our lives has, shifted online, especially in the last couple of years. And sometimes we can forget that, our online interactions, have offline and online, consequences. And we want to take this moment to remind people that when we are online, we are in relationship with each other. The heart or core of digital media is that they are connected. We are all connected in an infinite, web of nodes and connections online. And I think sometimes we forget that relational element. We forget that there is a person on the other end of a comment or a post or a piece of content that we're sharing.
Well, you say we forget there's a person on the other end of the content that we're sharing or being insulting about or being toxic about or whatever. Is it a question of forgetting, or is it a question of we really don't care? We just want to say what we want to say and we don't give a damn who we hurt?
I think the online environment can facilitate some of that toxicity that you mentioned, for sure. And that's also something that we have a responsibility to be aware of, but also, a responsibility of platforms, regulators and so on. I think, things, especially when it comes to toxic or online hate and prejudice, it's incredibly important that we push back against those things. Our research has shown that it's typically the loudest 10% minority, in fact, that's pushing the sort of value setting or norm setting within online communities. So it's really important for us as users to signal to other users that these are not, in fact, the accepted norms or values of the online spaces that we are engaging in. And another way that we can, that can be remedied is through platforms making reporting of online hate and prejudice more accessible, easier to use, and also demonstrating enforcement when the codes of behavior in online spaces are broken. Because again, that would signal to users in the space that this kind of behavior is unacceptable. And when those codes of conduct are broken, that enforcement on the part of the platform is in fact, going to happen. That's one thing that our research has shown, is that users want to know when they report this kind of behavior that platforms are doing something about it.
Okay, let's tackle this from another angle, and that is personal information. What kind of personal information do you think we ought to be careful about sharing online?
Well, I think for sure we want to be mindful of things like our full birth date, our hometown, your address, both email address and your physical address, your phone number. And there are lots of ways that various, again, aspects of our online engagement can sort of trick us into handing over that information, sometimes unknowingly or not in ways that we originally anticipated. So one thing I would suggest is when you're signing up for an app or a platform, look for the kinds of information that's typically marked by an asterisk. That is information that is essential to be able to sign up for the platform. But otherwise, you're giving over that information sort of your own free will, and it's not necessarily required to utilize a platform. So, think about those things. You can also be aware of when you're engaging on online surveys, or sometimes, we see those quizzes, or we get an e-card and they're asking for information as well. That information is often used by data brokers and, and advertisers in ways that we sometimes may not have originally intended our information to be used.
I hear you, but oftentimes isn't it the case that we give that extra information because if it's a shopping website, they're going to send us stuff that we're interested in. If it's an entertainment website, they're going to send us information about other concerts or movies or whatever that's sort of in our wheelhouse. So that's all presumably to the good. At what point does it become problematic and the sharing of data becomes harmful?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And our research, we've worked with young Canadians, youth in particular, but I think the sentiment is felt across generations. And that often privacy feels like the price we have to pay to play in these online spaces. And I think, when it comes to things like entertainment and leisure content, like you mentioned, our research has shown that for the most part, users are perfectly fine with getting advertisements that are, geared to their interests and their likes. But we've also done research that's looked at things like algorithms and artificial intelligence and how they're using data to recommend content to us. And users were flagging deep concerns with the way in which algorithms are making assumptions about groups of people based on things like race, sex, class, and determining what kinds of content to show those users. Also the way that algorithms and bias and prejudice are creeping up in things like, resume sifting, whether or not someone qualifies for a mortgage. Those were things that, are deeply problematic and deeply concerning. So I think there certainly is a kind of spectrum here, but again, I think the lack of autonomy and control that users feel around their privacy is troubling.
Kara, well, obviously this. Media literacy is certainly not what we need it to be. And I wonder if you could share some ways that you know of in which disreputable folks can trick people who are not as media literate as they should be into doing things online that they shouldn't be doing.
Yeah, and I mean, even folks like myself who do sort of digital media literacy for a living can be sometimes duped into, sharing misinformation. I think it's really important to keep in mind that today it's easy to copy and share content online. And so it's incredibly important that we go to the original source of a piece of information, especially if you're getting your news content primarily through social media. It's not enough to read a thumbnail or a headline over an image and reshare that. You have to do the work of going into the original source. It's also important to verify sources. Websites that are fake, look fake can be real, and websites that look real can be fake. And so doing things like a Wikipedia search to figure out if that organization is reputable. You can do a Google News search to see if multiple news outlets, including news outlets with different political bents, are reporting on a similar story. And I think it's also important these days to keep in mind the way in which our emotions come into play when we're sharing information. At the beginning of the pandemic, when things were really uncertain, and I was feeling a lot of fear, I was almost manipulated into sharing this, what I thought was a really good news piece about marine life returning to the Venice canals. And then after doing some reverse image searching and going to some original sources, I realized that those images were real, but they weren't of the Venice canal. They were being used in a different context. So my desire to share that good news story in a time when I was feeling a lot of fear and uncertainty impacted, or in some way sort of clouded my judgment. So we also need to take our emotions into consideration as well when we're sifting through the online information ecosystem.
Well, you're going to forgive this question, but if an expert like you can be tricked, what hope is there for the rest of us?
Well, I think there's actually quite a lot of hope, and we have this 4 sort of step process for what we call breaking the fake. And often you only need to do one of the steps, and it takes very little time. And we can keep in mind that there are fact-checking sources like Snopes. There are experts who do this for a living. It's not hard to check a source through a fact-checking site. And again, searching for the original source, verifying the source, checking other sources. Usually just one of those steps will help you determine if something is true or not.
Well, but the thing is, Kara, that requires effort. And most people, I guess, don't want to take the effort. In fact, it's more fun to just forward it or pass it along to Aunt Martha without any regard whatsoever to the veracity of what you're passing along. So what do we do about that?
Yeah, and I think we're kind of back to this idea of digital citizenship and ethical digital citizenship and what are our responsibilities. And I think, again, we have to keep in mind that in this digital world, we are all connected, more so than in the traditional media sense. I am no longer, primarily the recipient of a newspaper that gets dropped off at, my, front door. Now I have the opportunity to read something and potentially circulate it to millions of people. And that comes with responsibility. It's great opportunity and great responsibility. And so I do think, it is, important that we all, consider the responsibility of our actions when sharing content online, and especially when they have repercussions for things like our public health and for people's political decision making. We shouldn't take these things lightly. So yes, I would encourage all of us, especially in Digital Citizen Day, to really think about the things that we can do, ourselves alongside, the actions we need to see by platforms and governments.
I know you think it's important, but it's also, I suspect, fair to say that, and here's where I sort of push back a little bit, there's no obligation. There's no legal obligation to be responsible when you're online. In fact, I've obviously interviewed lots of people who say you may be more responsible being more disruptive online. You may be being responsible, pushing back and chafing at authority. And, my view would be if you do it in a civil way, that's fine, but it's the incivility that I find problematic. How do you get the message across to people that actually the internet's main use is not to blow things up or be a complete jackass online, but actually to be a responsible citizen?
Yeah, I think it's really important that folks keep in mind that not everyone experiences the internet in the same way. There are folks, racialized people, sexually and gender diverse folks, people who identify as female, who actively disengage from online spaces and avoid the internet because it is an unsafe place for them. And so I think, we have a lot of work to do in terms of making sure that the internet is a place for everyone, that they can engage, that they can amplify, that they can feel safe enough to sort of push back, as you're saying, against authority, to share their views in respectful ways. But we're a long way from having an internet where everybody feels like they can share their views and opinions safely. And I think we need to keep that in mind. And I'm not just talking about some of the lesser known platforms. I'm talking about all of the kinds of platforms that most of us are regularly engaging in on a daily basis. And these are spaces that a lot of folks don't feel safe on. And we do have a responsibility, as I said, we as other users have a responsibility to signal to our, fellow platform users that this kind of behavior is unacceptable, and to bring it to the attention of the platforms as well, and to use our collective power as users to hold platforms and governments accountable.
Well, I'm with you on that one. Happy Digital Citizen Day to you and Kara Brisson-Boyven. We're grateful you could spare some time for us on TVO tonight. Many thanks.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks again.
And that is the agenda for Wednesday, October 26th, 2022. Tomorrow, why the pursuit of smart cities might not be as clever as it first seemed. Also, the case against trusting Silicon Valley with the future of transportation. I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org, and we'll see you again tomorrow.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.